I had only been living in New York for 3 months when it happened. Before that, I had spent my whole life in Maine. Maine was quiet, simple. Even when something scared you there, you usually knew where the fear was coming from. Wind in the trees, an empty road, a house with no lights on at the end of a dirt driveway. Fear had a shape there. New York was different. The city made you feel watched, even when no one was looking at you. Not by people, not by cameras, by the city itself. Like every window, every alley, every locked door had a memory. I was renting a tiny apartment on the Lower East Side. Old building, narrow hallway, thin walls. Someone was always walking upstairs. Someone's TV was always on. Someone's baby was always crying. After Maine, it felt like living inside someone else's fever dream. But rent was rent. My job was close. And I kept telling myself this was what starting over felt like. At the time, I worked in a small gallery shop that sold prints, old posters, overpriced design objects, and vintage things for tourists with more money than sense. One evening, a delivery came late, so I stayed almost 2 hours past closing. By the time I left, it was already dark, not a midnight dark. Just that strange hour when New York starts to shift. Cafes are still open, but the sidewalks thin out. Store windows are still glowing, but the gaps between them feel too black. I should have taken my usual route home. Instead, I cut through a courtyard and slipped into a narrow passage between two buildings. I had never gone that way before. That was where I saw the sign. At first, I noticed the light. Warm, gold, old-fashioned. Not the white LED light you see everywhere now. Then I looked up. Long gold letters above a glass entrance. Eldridge Arcade. I stopped. The strangest part wasn't the name. It was that I was almost certain this place had not been there before. Behind the glass stood mannequins in dresses. Not cheap retro costumes. Real dresses. Beaded, delicate, low-waisted, with that 1920s shape. I have always loved historical clothing, and even I could tell these weren't fake. But they weren't falling apart either. They looked too real to be costumes, too perfect to be antiques, too alive to be museum pieces. I was tired, cold, and the place looked warm, so I opened the door. There was no bell, no sound at all. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew it wasn't just a store. It was bigger than it could have been from the outside. A covered arcade, 2 levels, narrow balconies, dark railings, small shops tucked into corners, yellow lamps, old wood, glass displays. Somewhere above me, a piano was playing very softly. The air smelled like fabric, dust, old wood, and something damp, like a room that had been closed for 100 years. There were people inside, not many at first, but I noticed immediately what was wrong with them. Their clothes. Men in old suits, vests, long coats. Women in dresses, gloves, little hats, perfectly waved hair. Not like actors, not like people at a theme party. Like they simply belonged to another time. And no one was talking, no laughter, no phones, no coughing, no footsteps echoing the way they should, just the piano. I pulled out my phone, no service, not weak service, not one bar, nothing. I told myself it was the walls, maybe the building was old, maybe I was in some weird private art space. I decided to walk through quickly and leave. The first shop on the right sold shoes. Rows of polished heels and little strap shoes sat on low shelves. Beautiful things. Black, ivory, soft gray, dark red. No price tags, not one. I picked up one shoe and almost dropped it. It was cold. Not cool like something left in a draft. Cold and damp, like it had been sitting in a cellar. Can I help you? I jumped. A woman stood right beside me. I hadn't heard her approach. She wore a dark blue dress, her hair pinned perfectly in place. Her face was pale and smooth, but it was her smile that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't cruel. It was worse. It looked practiced, painted on, like someone had drawn a smile on a face that had forgotten how to make one. "No, thank you," I said. She stared at me for a few seconds without blinking. Then she nodded and stepped away, but I could still feel her watching me. I left the shop. My heart was beating faster now. The next store sold dresses, and I hated that. For one moment, I forgot to be afraid. They were beautiful. Dark green silk, black beadwork, smoky gray fabric, deep burgundy velvet. Dresses that looked heavy, expensive, and impossibly old. I touched one. It was freezing. I pulled my hand back. Then I saw the mirror. It stood in the corner in a heavy dark frame, the glass cloudy around the edges. I don't know why I walked toward it. Maybe I wanted to prove I was still normal, that I was just tired. I stood in front of the mirror, and at first I saw myself, my coat, my jeans, my tired face. Then the reflection changed. I was wearing one of the dresses, a black dress with beaded fringe. My hair was styled differently. My face looked paler. My neck looked thinner. I turned around fast. Nothing. Just racks of clothing and warm yellow light. I looked back at the mirror. The reflection was still there. For one tiny second it moved after I did. Then it snapped back. That was enough. I left the shop almost running. The piano upstairs sounded louder now, slower, like someone was playing the same few notes over and over again. When I stepped into the arcade, there were more people than before. I don't know where they had come from. A woman by the railing, 2 men near a display case, an elderly couple by the stairs, a young woman in a pale dress near a column. All of them were looking at me. I turned toward where the entrance should have been, but the door was gone. In its place was a narrow, dark hallway. I turned to the nearest woman. "Excuse me, where's the exit?" She tilted her head slowly. That same smile. "People rarely leave after they arrive," she said. Her voice was soft, almost kind. "I need to get out." She looked confused. "Why?" Not mocking, not threatening. Like she truly didn't understand why anyone would want to leave. I didn't answer. I turned and walked the other way. That was when I realized I no longer understood the layout. The stairs led somewhere they shouldn't. A shop I had already passed appeared again ahead of me, but the window display was different. Hallways bent wrong. Lights dimmed and brightened without reason. It was like being inside a dream that had learned how to pretend it was a building. I went upstairs. The second floor was darker, quieter. The piano faded, and then I heard whispering. At first I thought the people had finally started talking, but the whispers weren't coming from them. They were coming from the walls, on both sides. Dozens of voices, just low enough that I couldn't make out a single word. I kept walking. I didn't want to look into any of the windows anymore. I felt like if I looked too long, I would see something I couldn't survive seeing. The whispers led me into a large room. There were no shops there. No music, no displays, only mannequins. Rows and rows of them. Men, women, children. All dressed like the people outside. But they weren't normal mannequins. They had faces. Not detailed faces. Blurred ones. Like someone had pressed real human faces into plaster and then smoothed them almost flat. Some of them were turned toward me. I backed away and bumped into someone. I spun around. A young woman stood behind me in a pale dress, almost like a wedding dress, but simpler. She looked directly at me. "You're new," she said. Her voice was the first voice in that place that sounded almost human. "What is this place?" I asked. She looked around at the rows of figures. "Everyone likes it at first. I need to leave." She looked back at me. Her eyes were strange. Not dead. Worse. They looked like the eyes of someone who understood everything and had stopped fighting. "Then you understand," she said quietly. "No one leaves." I ran. I didn't care where. The hallways felt narrower now, the air thicker, the lights dimmer. The piano started again, but now it was skipping, the same phrase repeating, over and over. Behind me I heard footsteps, slow, measured, not running. That was the worst part. Whoever was behind me didn't need to hurry. They already knew I wasn't getting out. Then I saw a door, a white sign above it. "Exit." I grabbed the handle and shoved it open. Cold night air hit my face. I stumbled out onto wet pavement and nearly fell. I did not look back until I reached the sidewalk. When I finally turned around, Eldridge Arcade was gone. No glass doors, no gold letters, no warm light. Just an old brick building with dark windows and a locked metal side door. I went home and didn't sleep. The next morning, I searched everything I could. Eldridge Arcade, old shopping arcade, Lower East Side Historic Passage, Vintage Mall, closed arcade. Nothing matched. A few old articles came up about the street, but nothing like what I had seen. By daylight, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Exhaustion, stress, panic attack, new city, bad food, anything but the truth. A few days later, I opened my closet and found the dress, the black one, the one from the mirror. It hung between my coat and my gray sweater like it had always been there. I stood there without breathing. Then I touched the fabric. Cold. I shoved it into a garbage bag, tied it shut, and threw it into the dumpsters behind my building. That night I heard piano music from my living room. Very soft. Very far away. I followed it to the room with the closet. The dress was hanging over the back of a chair, like someone had been wearing it only minutes earlier, like someone had just taken it off and set it there. I didn't scream, I didn't touch it. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, my coat, and left. I spent the night in my car, outside a 24-hour grocery store. The next morning I took the dress and drove it to another neighborhood. I threw it into a construction dumpster. 3 days later, it was back in my closet. That was when I stopped touching it. I just closed the closet door and pretended that part of the room didn't exist. Then the footsteps started. At first, I blamed the neighbors. Old building, thin walls. But these steps were different. They sounded like someone walking on my floor. From the closet to the door, from the hallway to the kitchen. Sometimes just 2 or 3 steps, then silence. After that came the reflections, in subway windows, pharmacy glass, the elevator mirror. For half a second, I would see myself wearing the dress. Sometimes my hair was styled like it had been in the arcade. Sometimes people stood behind me in the reflection, still, watching. When I turned around, no one was there. I stopped sleeping. I stopped looking in mirrors. I researched the neighborhood again and again until I finally found one old newspaper clipping from almost a century ago. A fire in a covered shopping arcade on that street. Several people were listed as missing, not dead. Missing. That word stayed with me. Missing. Not found. Not recovered. Just gone. A week later, an old woman in my building stopped me near the stairs. Mrs. Levy, 3rd floor. We had only spoken a few times. She looked at me and said, "You went back there, didn't you?" I froze. Back where? She stared past my shoulder. "You can't return to that arcade." Before I could ask anything else, she went pale and hurried upstairs. The next day she was gone. People in the building started asking if anyone had seen her. Her apartment door was locked from the inside. No one answered. That night I woke up to loud piano music. It was coming from the stairwell. I opened my apartment door. The hallway light was flickering. Downstairs from the 1st floor came that warm yellow glow. I walked down a few steps, and there it was. Eldridge Arcade. Inside my building. Gold letters above glass. Mannequins in the window. And behind the glass, near the stairs, stood Mrs. Levy. She wore her neat coat and looked completely calm. Then the young woman in the pale dress stepped beside her and gently took her arm. Both of them smiled at me. Mrs. Levy lifted one hand, as if she was inviting me inside. I ran back upstairs, locked my door, dragged the dresser in front of it, and sat on the floor until morning. The next day I left New York. I went back to Maine and told my sister the city had just been too much for me. She thought I had burned out. I let her think that. It has been more than a year. I don't live alone anymore. I don't cut through alleys. I don't look too long into store windows after dark. But it didn't end. Sometimes at night I still hear piano music, very faint, very far away. Like someone is playing in a room no one has opened in years. And sometimes in a mirror I don't move exactly when my reflection moves. The worst thing happened last month. I was in a small shopping center here in Maine. Nothing strange. A pharmacy, a shoe store, a coffee shop. I passed a dark store window and saw my reflection. First, myself. Then the dress, black, beaded. Then warm yellow light behind me. Then a 2nd floor with balconies. And people standing above looking down at me. I turned around. There was only the normal mall corridor. Mothers with kids. An old man with coffee. A janitor pushing a cart. When I looked back at the glass, it was just me. Since then, I keep thinking about what the girl in the arcade said. No one leaves. At the time, I thought she meant the building. Now I'm not so sure. Maybe she meant something else. Maybe once you walk into that place, a part of you never comes back out. And maybe that's why people keep disappearing. Because sooner or later, the arcade comes back for what's left. If you've made it this far, you're ready for the next story. It's already waiting on the channel.